I'll introduce. But before I do that, I want to make an announcement so we can celebrate with her. Miss Haley just found out tonight that she is going to be serving with life action over the next year. Please be praying with her now. She's starting the whole process of raising support, everything comes with that. But she found out tonight that she's going to be serving with him, so she is super excited. So please tell her congratulations at some point tonight. Guys, since I don't get a chance to speak tonight, I'm going to at least get a chance to pray. So let me open us up in prayer. Father, I thank you that even in the midst of crazy nights, even when all the tech stuff goes wrong, even when we're running around up until the second it starts, it does not change the fact that you are really, really good. God, it doesn't change your holiness, it doesn't change your grace, it doesn't change your mercy. And Father, we gather in this place tonight, thankful for who you are and what you've done for us. God, even as we sang in that last song, as we thought about the sacrifice that you gave through the person of Christ. Father, we're in awe as we gather together tonight. Father, I pray over Scott as he comes and speaks your truth to us. Father, may you convict and challenge through your Spirit. And God, tonight may the gospel become even more real to each and every one of us. God, may you receive all the praise, all the glory, and the honor. May we have great times in small groups, great times in fellowship. And God, may you receive the praise that you are so worthy of. For it's in your name we pray. Amen. Well, guys, like I said, we have a guest speaker. I better put this back on because my hair is rough tonight. We have a guest speaker with us tonight. I will start telling. I got to sit down 3 weeks ago, and hear this man's story. I'm really excited for what he has to share with us tonight. I won't go into his story because I don't want to steal any of his thunder. But guys, will you welcome with me Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask an icebreaker more than anything for myself so I can calm my nerves. So who has plans this Memorial Day? Anybody have plans? What you got going on, man? Awesome. How about you?
I'm going swimming.
Okay. What you got going on? A what? Oh, that's cool. That's cool. All right. So does everybody know what Memorial Day is really about? Kind of how it got started? All right. Somebody like to share? Okay. Let me get a guy.
Honor military that died for us. Honor soldiers that died for us.
That's right. That's right. Good job. So Memorial Day was started directly after the Civil War. It was a time that America had lost more troops ever, mostly because we was fighting amongst ourselves. And they were, a lot of military-style graves were popping up all over, cemeteries. And so they wanted to do something to honor these men's sacrifices. And it started in just small communities all over the place, just wanted to honor those that they had lost in those fights. But through that process, later on, it ended up getting adopted as a national holiday, and we celebrate that now. It can oftentimes get confused and going to the beach and cookouts and camping and things like that, and we don't really spend as much time focusing on what that holiday is really supposed to be about. So I hope that through my message tonight, you guys will get a better understanding of what that really means, especially to us soldiers. So I want to share a little bit about myself. September 11th, 2001 is a day that I will remember forever. I was 16 years old and I was in high school. And in the middle of the day, everything stopped at school and all the TVs popped on. And everything was playing the news. And this, go to the next slide. This is what we see. And we had an active terrorist attack on our country. Sorry. At 16, I was too young to go and fight, but I knew I wanted to. So the following year, September 15th, 2002, at 17, I joined the Army. And I trained with the Army while I was a senior in high school. And so when most people would be doing different things on the weekends as a senior, I was training in the military. And as soon as I graduated, I went to basic training, and then I went to my advanced training. Next slide. So this is a picture of me at 18 years old at Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, training to get ready to go over to Iraq. Directly after, I got my orders to go to Iraq. And the process was a long process. I went to Mississippi for 6 months to get all my shots, get all my records, get all my uniforms, and then to train and prepare for what I was getting myself into. And there's only so much training a person can do in America to prepare for what you're getting ready to go into. War is the closest thing to hell on earth that a human can experience. And at 19, I was getting ready to go. Go to the next slide. This is me driving a 5-ton truck in Iraq. At that time, we did not have armor-plated vehicles. Everything was just vinyl doors. And as you know, vinyl doesn't stop anything. Can't even really stop the wind, let alone what the terrorists over in Iraq were doing to us. So the week before we drove into Iraq, they dropped off some pallets of steel plate. And they said, you guys got a week. Whatever you can do with it, that's all we got. And as you see directly behind my peace sign there, there is a metal silhouette. We had taken out all the windows and all the components of the door and put a steel plate there so we at least had something to protect us while we were driving. Half of my unit drove in from Kuwait, and they drove all the way across the country of Iraq, and we were stationed on the whole Iran border. And our job was to patrol that border to keep invading forces that were coming over from Iran and Saudi Arabia and Yemen that were coming into Iraq to fuel the fire of the work that the terrorists were doing. And so we patrolled that place regularly. And I was on a patrol during that picture. Oftentimes, because I was, obviously nervous about what I was going out to. I don't know if you can see, I got earbuds in, and I'd play some music to really get me hyped up for what I was going into or what I may encounter. My job in the military was I was a wrecker operator. And I'm sure you guys have seen some car broke down and a wrecker coming and picking it up. Well, it's a whole different ballgame in a country where everybody hates you. And what my job was, I was attached to a unit of infantrymen. And when they would get information about known terrorist activity, we would go into that area and we would raid the houses, try to find the terrorists, try to find intel to go get other people. And my job was to secure the outside of that perimeter. So if anybody ran out of the building, it was my job to get them. And also, coming to and from those missions, there was a high likelihood that we would be ambushed or attacked by an IED. And I know you guys may or may not have heard that term on the news, an improvised explosive device. These would be bombs that they would place on the side of the road and hide, and you couldn't see them. So you could be driving down the road 1 minute, and the next minute your vehicle would get blown up. And so my job as a wrecker operator was to make sure that we brought all those vehicles back, even after they had been blown up. So we'd have to secure the area, and then I would have to hook up and make sure we brought everything home, because every military vehicle has sensitive items in them. You can continue on to the next slide. This was a mission that I was doing right on the Iran border. And we had a commo, or communications tower there. Because there was mountainous terrain, it was very difficult to get radio signal to different areas when troops needed help. So up on top of this mountain, right by the Iran border, we set up radio towers. And so I was out there for 10 days, sleeping in a shed would be a poor explanation for what I was sleeping in. But a little shack is what we lived in for 10 days with no electricity, and we guarded that radio tower. We were surrounded by 3 villages, and they knew we were there. And so I was using that tank as a patrol vehicle to patrol the area, and mounted behind me is a Browning 50 cal fully automatic machine gun. To go to the next slide. And so that's me gunning the 50 cal. This weapon, actually, what we were trying to do when we were out there is just let them know we were there. So I had actually been shooting that weapon just into a berm, just so they knew we had firepower, don't come mess with us. And I ended up messing up my hearing really bad in my left ear because that thing's pretty loud. And when you have to shoot it, you can't stop and put your earplugs in. You can't tell them to wait. So next picture. On this mission, we were going into a new village, and we were trying to make friends with the chiefs and elders of the village. Every village functions as its own community or own town, and the village chief or leader would be similar to that of a mayor. And so we had to get permission from that individual to do anything in his town, and if he didn't like us, then it would be really bad for us quite regularly. And so on this particular mission, our interpreter and my commander was meeting with the elders, and what I was doing was trying to make friends with the next generation, the children, so that we didn't have the same problem 10, 15 years down the road, that these kids wouldn't grow up hating us, that they'd have a positive outlook on Americans. Because they're indoctrinated at a very young age that all Christians, Jews, Americans, Westerners are pure evil, and they're bred to hate us. That's all I can say about that. In this situation, I was trying to hand out candy, stuffed animals, shoes, because in their culture, all the men have shoes. The women, hit or miss, because they're more like farm animals in their culture. And the children, none of them had shoes. And that little boy there didn't have any. And so that little boy came up to me, and that little white book that is in his hand, he was trying to teach himself English. And on one side of the book, it said English and had pictures, and the other side was Arabic. And he came up to me, and whenever they greet you, they would always say, "Mister, Mister," and they would pull on your jacket. But you had to be careful, because the terrorists would also train them on what our weapons look like. And they would pay them per bullet that they stole from us. So they would know where the safety release was on our weapon and take our magazine. And so if something happened, you would only have one round in the chamber, and you'd be wasting time. So you always had to keep your distance from them. And I only learned 2 words in Arabic, which was imshi, which means get away, and Alibaba, bad guy terrorist. And so the kids would flock to you quite often. But in this case, this guy, he just wanted to learn how to say a word. And he came up to me with that book, and he pointed at a picture, and he was just doing this, because nobody could teach him how to pronounce it. And it was a picture of a giraffe. And so I taught that young man how to say giraffe in English. And he taught me it in Arabic, but I forgot. But I hope that he still remembers, because I will forever remember him. There were good times in Iraq. The camaraderie that we had among our brothers was very strong. But as you all know, war is a very difficult thing, and it's not pleasurable. I went to Iraq. I was the 3rd unit to deploy, and when we were there, you may or may not remember, but that was when the Iraqi people got to vote for their country's leadership for the first time in all history. And when that was going on, I was actually guarding voting booths. So there was a lot of people that did not want those votes to take place, especially the individuals that were part of Saddam's regime, which would be like his closest family, almost in a gang-type mentality. And so they didn't want their government to be able to vote. And so there would be people that would show up, and their job was to prevent people from voting or for the voting booths to even take place. And so we would have to secure those areas. Let's see, losing my slide here. So what I want you guys to know is that through my story and through other stories is that freedom isn't free, but it has been paid for. There is a cost to our freedom, and though you may not be the individual paying for it, someone had to sacrifice. Someone had to be willing to step up and say, "I'll do that, I'll take that," so somebody else can live freely. So I wrote down just a couple of things that I want you guys to think about to help you better illustrate this. So show of hands, how many of you have cell phones? good majority. Now, how many of you have a job and work and pay for that cell phone 100% on your own? A whole lot less. Looks like all the adults. So your parents or someone who loved you had to be willing to work and sacrifice their time and their money so that you could have that phone, right? So a similar concept when it comes to freedom. So in many countries around the world, especially in Iraq, they do not have the freedom to pick their husband or wife. I'm sure many of you would like to be able to do that. I personally was approached by a man who tried to give me his 13-year-old daughter. He came to me, approached me, he said, "You're American, you're a soldier, you're a good man, I want you to have my daughter." And in our country, we can't even fathom that. But that's how their countries ran. A child in that culture is an expense a lot of times. And once they get to a certain age, if they can marry that child off, that expense is no longer the family's. It is the husband's who's took on that responsibility. And they want their children to go to influential people so that they'll live a good life. I went to villages where I seen a family of 10 in a mud hut smaller than the majority of our homes' restrooms. And that's where they lived. And they slept on the ground, and they had one pot and one pan, no running water, no bathrooms, and that was their life. And it wasn't going to change. And they're probably still living that way today. How about the freedom that we have here in America to be able to dress and express who we are with our clothing, with our art, with our vehicles? That's not a freedom that people have around the world. Women, particularly in the country that I went to, young girls before the age of, say, 12, they usually had very little clothing on. And there was no real difference between boys or girls' clothes at that age. But as soon as they start to progress to the age of adolescence, they're fully covered. And in some areas, it's a little less strict, and their whole face is covered, and you can only see from base of the chin and no hair at all, and the neck. Clothing is very oversized, so there's no possibility to see any kind of form to the woman's body. In other areas, it's extremely strict, and it's all black, extremely thick fabric that covers everything except their eyes. So it depended on which tribe or which family you were a part of as to how you were allowed to dress. So a lot of times in our culture, we take all the freedoms that we have in this country for granted. But somebody had to pay for those freedoms. It wasn't initially that way. I'm sure most of you have heard of the Revolutionary War. And really what happened is we were getting oppressed by the European country because we had left them, and they wanted all of our tax money from our profits. And they wanted to tell us what we could and couldn't believe in our religious practices. And we decided to fight against that and become our own nation. And now we still celebrate some of the same freedoms today. It's because men and women that were willing to fight and die for what we believe in. This idea that we call America. So I'm going to show a slide. Of men that I fought with and never be home. So if you all would please stand in a moment of silence. Take a seat, please. Sorry, not too many things make me emotional. But of all that is sacrificed for us, I believe Christ paid the ultimate sacrifice. He lived in a perfect home, under perfect conditions, without sin. And he was willing to give it all up because he loved us. And his love for us was so great that he sacrificed himself for our eternal freedom. Just as my brothers in arms sacrificed their life for this idea of America, Christ sacrificed his life for the whole world, for all of humanity from all history, all that came before and all that are going to come. John 15:13 states that greater love has no one than to lay down one's life for one's friend. So Christ laid down the foundation for what a soldier would do for his country. Christ was our example to pay the ultimate sacrifice, to be willing to lay down your life. And so, just as there was a cost for the freedoms that we have here in America, there is a cost to the freedom that we can gain of eternal salvation. And that cost doesn't have to be paid by me or you. That cost was already paid for by Christ on the cross. So I made something that I want to show you to hopefully help you better understand this. Before Christ ever made it to the cross, most of you know he was flogged. But this is not a practice that we experience in our culture. So I made a flog of a similar design to help you better understand what he could have experienced. They would have used this. This is called a cat of nine tails. These are leather straps with forged metal hooks on the end. And oftentimes it would have bones or shards of metal all through each strap. And they discovered over time from flogging individuals that 40 lashes was too much, that a human couldn't take 40 lashes. So they reduced it to 39. And so Christ was beat roughly 39 times with something quite similar to this before he carried his own cross. And he did this for me, and he did it for each of you. Because when he looked into all of humanity, looked into the future, he knew each one of you by name. And he said, I will take that punishment. I will take that upon myself because I love them that much. The sacrifice he paid, we can't fathom, because it's hard for us to understand what it would be like to live in perfection and willingly give that up. None of us had ever experienced living in a place that was perfect. And none of us had ever experienced the kind of torture that he went through before he was sacrificed. Romans 6:23 says, the wages of sin is death. There has to be a sacrifice for the sin that we have committed. And so I want to try to give you guys an illustration of this. Imagine you're in a courtroom, and there's so much evidence piled up against you that there's no way you're escaping your punishment. They got all the DNA, all the research, pictures, video, whatever you want to imagine. There's no way that you can stand before a judge and say, I'm free, I'm innocent. And just before the judge is about to bang his gavel and give out your sentence, someone steps up from the back and say, you know what, Judge? I love that guy so much, I'll take his punishment. And the judge is trying to ration with this guy. What do you mean you'll take his punishment? You had nothing to do with this. He said, but I love him. I will give up my life. I will give up my freedom. I will give up everything to save this guy. And so that's what Christ done for each of us. He just didn't do it for one person. He did it for all humanity. He took each one of our punishments. And so I want you guys also to understand, what is sin? I'm sure most of you, if you've grown up in the church, you have an idea of this, but I'm going to break it down real simple for you by the concept or by the teachings of the Ten Commandments. So if you have ever broke these things, then you have separated yourself from God. And I'm not going to go over every one of them, but I want you to just think about, have you ever told a lie? I want to let you know before we get into these, I've broken every commandment. Have you ever stole something? Even the smallest little stick of gum that wasn't yours. Did you take it? That's stealing. So, have you ever disrespected your parents? I have. And God said, to commit the act of adultery. But Christ later said to look at another person of the opposite sex with lust in your heart. You've committed adultery already. And I remember when I was your guys' age, I'm guilty. And Christ also said, with the commandment, have you ever committed murder? But he said if you had hatred in your heart toward another person, then you've already committed murder. I'm guilty. So just by looking at these few commandments, I'm separated from God. There's no way that a perfect God in a perfect home would allow me, a sinful person, into his home. I'd mess it up. It's no longer unblemished. It's no longer perfect if he allowed me in. But when he looked out in humanity, he said, I love them. I want them here. And the only way that this could be possible is a perfect sacrifice. And that's why Christ came down. He gave up everything for each one of us. So I don't know where you stand with your relationship with God. I don't know if he is the Lord of your life. I don't know if you willingly stepped off the throne, stopped trying to take control of your own life, and have given it to God. I don't know if you've done that. That's between you and him. You could very easily be raised in the church. You could very easily be staff at the church. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're in right standing with God. So if you have sins that you know you've committed, if you know that you are separated from God at this moment, don't walk out of here without this changing your life, without hearing what Christ's done for you, and just walk out as if nothing different has ever happened. You have an opportunity to be in right standing with God, whether that's here, in this room, in front of your peers, or in your life groups, with your life group leaders, or even if it's out in the parking lot. Don't leave this place unchanged by what Christ's done for you. It's an opportunity of a lifetime, and it will change your life. For me, myself, when I came back from Iraq, I was messed up. I couldn't handle it. I volunteered to go back to Iraq because I couldn't. And I got into a deep, dark place. And if it wasn't for my wife, at the time my girlfriend, her grandmother invited us to church. And I only went because I didn't want her to find a good guy that was going to treat her better than I know I was. So I was keeping an eye on her. But God had a different plan. God convicted me of all the commandments I had broken, of all the sins that I had committed against him, and he said, I'll take that burden. You can't carry it anymore. And I couldn't. So I don't know what's going on in your life, but lay your burdens down. Give it to him. If you'd like to play a song, and I want you guys to just evaluate your life. Evaluate the sins that you may be struggling with now, and lay them down at the foot of the cross. If you need someone to pray with you, and you want to ask Christ to be your Savior, we can do that too. If you want somebody just to pray with you to let go of sin, we can do that too. Whatever it is that's going on in your life, Christ can handle it. So I'll tell you the things that I've done, the things that I've experienced in my life, it's pretty tough. And he took it all. So whatever you're dealing with, Don't walk out of here unchanged. Think about anything that you may have been through this week. Think about your words, your actions. Is there anything you might have said or done this week you need to do business with God with today? What about getting into a disagreement with your parents that got a little more heated than it should have? I've been there. Anything you need to do business with God, lay it down now. Let Him have it.
Hear my sins are washed away. Hear my soul has found its place at the foot of the cross. Yeah, and I once was lost, but now I'm found. And all my chains fall to the ground. Oh Jesus, take my life, I lay it down at the foot of the cross. At the foot of the cross. Yes, take my life, I lay it down at the foot of the cross.
No, God's word tells us we can only serve one master. You either love the one and hate the other, cling to one and flee from the other. So I want you to think about who you serve. Right?
Man, I know for some of y'all, some of the first images you put up on the screen